My pregnant wife banned me from the delivery room because she wanted her first love, David, to be the first to hold her first child. So I shut off funding, canceled her registry, and left her first love the bill. Well, here I am, 34 years old, and still trying to figure out how the hell I ended up in this mess. My name's Marcus Hale, and up until recently, I thought I had my shit together. I'm a carpenter by trade. Not exactly glamorous, but it pays the bills and keeps my hands busy, which is more than I can say for half the guys I went to high school with who are still living in their parents' basements playing video games and complaining about the system. I built what I thought was a pretty decent life. Nothing fancy, mind you. I'm not driving around in some souped-up truck with truck nuts hanging from the back, and I don't have a man cave with 3 flat-screen TVs and a beer fridge. But I've got a solid roof over my head, a mortgage that doesn't make me want to cry into my Cheerios every morning, and enough money in the bank to take my wife out for dinner at someplace nicer than Applebee's on special occasions. Speaking of my wife, Clara, goddamn, where do I even start with Clara? She was supposed to be my world, my everything. The woman who made me believe in all that happily ever after bullshit they sell you in movies. We've been married for 4 years, and I genuinely thought what we had was solid as the oak cabinets I build in my workshop. You know that feeling when you think you finally got life by the balls? Yeah, that was me. Stupid, naive, completely clueless me. I worked my ass off for that woman. And I mean really worked. 12-hour days swinging hammers, measuring twice and cutting once, dealing with contractors who couldn't organize a one-man parade, let alone a construction project. My back ached constantly, my hands were permanently stained with wood varnish, and I'm pretty sure I've inhaled enough sawdust to build a small shed in my lungs. But I did it all because I thought we were building something together, you know? A life, a future, all that sappy romantic crap that makes single guys roll their eyes and married guys nod knowingly. The kicker? I turned down better offers. Real money too. Jobs in other cities, opportunities that could have set us up for life. But no, Marcus the Magnificent decides to stay put because heaven forbid we uproot our precious little life. We're building something here, Clara. I'd say, like some kind of wisdom-spouting philosopher who'd figured out the secret to domestic bliss. Why chase money when we've got everything we need right here? Christ, I should have charged admission for people to come watch me be that delusional. My buddy Leo, who runs the hardware store where I buy most of my supplies, used to give me endless shit about how devoted I was. Marcus, he'd say while ringing up my latest purchase of screws and sandpaper, you're married to Clara more than you are to yourself, man. When's the last time you did something just for you? And I'd laugh it off, make some joke about how marriage is about compromise and partnership, all while secretly feeling pretty damn proud of myself for being such a dedicated husband. Leo wasn't wrong, though. Looking back now, and trust me, hindsight is a real son of a bitch. I can see that I'd completely lost myself in being Clara's husband. I stopped hanging out with my friends as much, stopped working on personal projects. Hell, I even gave up my Sunday morning fishing trips because Clara said she felt abandoned when I was gone for a few hours. I should have seen that red flag waving so hard it could have powered a small wind farm, but instead, I interpreted it as her wanting to spend more time with me. Because I'm an idiot. A well-meaning, hard-working, completely oblivious idiot. The funny thing is, I actually enjoyed being that guy. You know, the devoted husband, the reliable provider, the man who always put his wife first. It felt good to be needed, to be the solid rock in someone else's life. When Clara would curl up next to me on the couch after a long day, or when she'd bring me a sandwich while I was working in the garage, or when she'd tell her friends how lucky she was to have me. Man, those moments made all the long hours and aching muscles worth it. I thought I was living the dream. The American dream, even. Work hard, love your wife, build a life together, and everything else will fall into place. I remember this one evening, must have been about 6 months before everything went to hell, when Clara and I were sitting on our back porch watching the sun set over our neighbor's half-dead vegetable garden. She had her feet propped up on my lap, and I was rubbing them because she'd had a long day at her office job. Something in marketing that I never fully understood but nodded along with whenever she talked about it. You know what I love about us? She said. And I'm thinking here it comes. One of those mushy romantic moments that'll make me feel like I'm starring in my own personal rom-com. We just fit together. Like we were made for each other. And I believed it. God help me, I believed every word. I squeezed her foot and said something equally cheesy back, probably about how she completed me or some other Jerry Maguire nonsense. But in that moment, sitting there with my wife, in the house I'd helped build, surrounded by the life we'd created together, I felt like the luckiest bastard alive. That's the thing about being completely blindsided. You never see it coming because you're too busy congratulating yourself on how well everything's going. I was so focused on being the perfect husband that I missed all the signs that my perfect wife wasn't nearly as invested in our perfect life as I thought she was. But we'll get to that train wreck soon enough. For now, just picture me. Marcus Hale, 34-year-old carpenter, devoted husband, future father, and grade-A sucker who thought he had life all figured out. Spoiler alert, I didn't have jack shit figured out. Holy shit, I'm gonna be a dad. That was literally the first thought that went through my brain when Clara dropped the bombshell on me. Not, oh wow, what wonderful news, or I'm so excited to start this journey with you, my beloved wife. Nope. Just a good old-fashioned American holy shit, followed by the kind of ugly crying you usually only see at funerals or when your team loses the Super Bowl in overtime. It was a Tuesday evening in March, and I'd just gotten home from installing kitchen cabinets at some rich lady's McMansion where she'd changed her mind about the hardware 3 times and acted like I was personally responsible for ruining her entire aesthetic vision. I was dirty, tired, and looking forward to nothing more than a beer, a sandwich, and maybe catching the end of whatever game was on ESPN. But Clara had other plans. She was sitting at our kitchen table, the one I'd built myself from reclaimed barn wood because I'm apparently a glutton for punishment, with this weird look on her face. Not happy, not sad, just intense. Like she was trying to solve a really complicated math problem in her head. In front of her was this little white plastic stick that looked suspiciously like those pregnancy tests they show in movies right before someone's life gets completely turned upside down. So, she said, and her voice had this shaky quality that made my stomach drop faster than a lead balloon. Remember how I've been feeling kind of weird lately? And that's when it hit me. The morning sickness she'd been blaming on that sketchy Chinese takeout place. The weird food cravings that had me running to the grocery store at 10 p.m. looking for pickles and ice cream, like some kind of cliché pregnancy stereotype. The way she'd been falling asleep on the couch every night by 8:30, which I'd just attributed to her stressful job. I looked at that little plastic stick, then at Clara, then back at the stick, and felt something inside me just completely break open. Not break like something was damaged, but break like a dam giving way to a flood of emotions I didn't even know I had. Before I knew it, I was sobbing like a little kid who'd just found out Santa was real after all. Are we? I couldn't even get the words out through the blubbering. Clara just nodded, and then she was crying too, and we were both sitting there at our kitchen table having what was probably the most emotional moment of our entire marriage over a pea stick. Romantic as hell, right? But man, once the initial shock wore off, I was all in. Like, embarrassingly, completely, over the moon all in. I went from 0 to super dad faster than you could say baby on board. The next day, I showed up at Clara's office with the biggest bouquet of flowers I could find. Roses, lilies, baby's breath, the whole 9 yards. Cost me almost $50, which might not sound like much to some people. But when you're living on a carpenter's salary and trying to save for a baby, $50 is a real commitment. Her coworkers were grinning like idiots when I walked in carrying this massive floral arrangement like I was trying to apologize for cheating or something. Special occasion? Asked Janet from accounting, who'd always struck me as the kind of woman who lived vicariously through other people's relationships because her own was deader than roadkill. We're having a baby, I announced, probably loud enough for the entire office to hear. And I swear to God, I felt like I was going to burst with pride. Like I'd just won the lottery, climbed Mount Everest, and solved world hunger all at the same time. That was just the beginning of my transformation into what my sister Rachel would later describe as the most annoyingly devoted expectant father in the history of mankind. Every week, like clockwork, I'd show up with flowers. Not the cheap gas station bouquets either. I'm talking about the good stuff from the actual florist who charged me an arm and a leg, but made arrangements that looked like they belonged in a magazine. When the morning sickness hit Clara hard around week 6, I turned into Gordon Ramsay meets Mr. Rogers. I'd wake up early every morning to make her ginger tea and toast cut into little triangles, because she said the crusts made her nauseous. I'd pack her crackers and ginger ale for work, leave little encouraging notes in her lunch bag, and rush home during my lunch break to check on her if she was having a particularly rough day. The real masterpiece, though, was the rocking chair. I spent 3 weeks in my garage after work, carefully selecting the perfect piece of oak, measuring and cutting each piece by hand, sanding until my arms felt like jelly. I wanted it to be perfect, not just functional, but beautiful. Something Clara could nurse our baby in, something that would last for generations. I even carved our initials and the date into the back, along with a little heart. Yeah, I know how that sounds. I was basically a Hallmark card come to life. My sister Rachel, bless her sarcastic heart, gave me endless shit about my newfound obsession with all things baby-related. She lived about 20 minutes away and had made it her personal mission to keep me grounded in reality, which apparently meant mocking me mercilessly every chance she got. "Marcus," she said one day when she caught me reading, "what to expect when you're expecting for the 3rd time. You do realize that the baby isn't even the size of a grape yet, right? You're acting like Clara's about to give birth tomorrow." But I didn't care. I was going to be a dad, and I was going to be the best damn dad that ever existed. I read every baby book I could get my hands on. I'm talking about everything from the basic baby care 101 stuff to the more advanced parenting philosophy books that made my brain hurt, but convinced me I needed to understand the psychological implications of different lullabies. During those evening reading sessions, Clara would curl up next to me on the couch, her head on my shoulder, and I'd read passages out loud while rubbing her still flat belly. "Listen to this," I'd say. "It says here that babies can hear sounds from outside the womb starting around 20 weeks. We should start playing classical music." And Clara would laugh, that genuine, happy laugh that made me fall in love with her all over again, and say something like, "Marcus, you're going to be such an amazing dad." Those were the moments I thought would last forever. Me, Clara, our unborn baby, and all the time in the world to build the perfect family. I'd whisper promises to her belly about how I'd never abandon them, how I'd always be there, how our kid would never have to wonder if daddy loved them. I meant every single word. Looking back now, those might have been the happiest few months of my entire life. I was building a family, creating something real and lasting and beautiful. Or at least, that's what I thought I was doing. You know that feeling when you're walking down the street, minding your own business, feeling pretty good about life, and then you step in a massive pile of dog shit? Yeah, that's basically what it felt like when David Cross waltzed back into our lives like he owned the place. Except this particular pile of dog shit had perfect abs, a winning smile, and apparently the supernatural ability to make my pregnant wife forget she had a husband. It started innocently enough, or at least that's what I kept telling myself while my gut was screaming that something was seriously wrong. Clara came home from her doctor's appointment one afternoon. This was around month 4 of the pregnancy, right when she was starting to show, and I was getting all kinds of excited about finally having a visible baby bump to talk to. And she had this weird energy about her. Not bad weird, but different weird. Like she'd just run into an old friend at the grocery store and spent 20 minutes catching up in the cereal aisle. "You'll never guess who I saw today," she said, setting her purse down on the kitchen counter with just a little too much casualness. You know that fake casual thing people do when they're about to drop news they know you're not going to love? That was Clara in that moment. "Who?" I asked, because apparently I'm a glutton for punishment and have never learned to recognize when ignorance might actually be bliss. "David Cross." And there it was. The name I hadn't heard in years, but somehow knew was going to fuck up my life the moment it came out of her mouth. David fucking Cross. Clara's high school sweetheart. Her first love. The guy she used to go on and on about during our early dating days, until I finally had to tell her that hearing about her ex-boyfriend's romantic gestures wasn't exactly making me feel like hot shit. Now, I'm not usually the jealous type. I mean, we all have exes, right? We all have that person from our past who meant something at some point. But David wasn't just any ex. This was the guy Clara had described as her first and only love back when we were dating, before she decided I was worth settling down with. The guy she'd lost her virginity to. The guy who'd apparently set the gold standard for romance that I'd been unknowingly competing against for years. "Oh yeah," I said, trying to keep my voice level while my brain started doing that thing where it spirals into worst-case scenarios faster than a tornado in Kansas. "How's he doing?" "Good, actually. Really good. He looks She paused, and I swear to God I could see her searching for a word that wouldn't make me want to put my fist through the drywall I'd installed myself. He looks really healthy. He's been working as a fitness trainer since his second divorce. Second divorce. Let me just pause here for a moment to appreciate the irony. This guy, this supposed paragon of masculine perfection who'd set the bar so impossibly high for every other man in Clara's life, had already crashed and burned through 2 marriages. But somehow, in Clara's eyes, he was still the golden boy who got away. According to Clara's breathless recap of their chance encounter at the doctor's office, what were the odds, right? David had been there visiting his sister who worked as a nurse. He'd been gone for years, living in different cities, trying to make it work with wife number 1, then wife number 2. And now he was back in our sleepy little town, working at some fancy fitness center where desperate housewives paid premium prices to have a good-looking guy tell them how to use a treadmill. He asked about us, Clara continued, and I noticed she was fidgeting with her wedding ring. I told him about the baby. He seemed really happy for us. Happy for us. Right. Because nothing says, I'm genuinely happy for my ex-girlfriend's success, like showing up in her life right when she's at her most vulnerable and hormonal. I'm sure his timing was purely coincidental. That's nice, I said, because what else was I supposed to say? Hey honey, I'd prefer if you didn't talk to the guy you used to be madly in love with while you're carrying our child. That would make me sound like a controlling asshole, and the last thing I wanted was to give Clara any reason to think David was the more reasonable option. But here's the thing. Over the next few weeks, David's name started popping up in conversation with alarming frequency. David mentioned this great prenatal yoga class. David said his sister recommended this birthing center. David thinks we should consider a water birth. David, fucking David. It was like the guy had appointed himself as our unofficial pregnancy consultant, and Clara was eating it up. Then came the texts. Oh, the goddamn texts. Clara had always been pretty open with her phone around me. We weren't one of those couples who hid our devices or acted all secretive about our communications. But suddenly, her phone was face down on the table during dinner. When it buzzed, she'd glance at it, and then quickly flip it over with this little smile that made my stomach twist into knots. Who's texting? I asked one night when her phone lit up for the 3rd time during our meal. Just David, she said, like it was the most natural thing in the world. He's checking in on how I'm feeling. Isn't that sweet? Sweet. Sure. Because nothing says appropriate boundaries, like a recently divorced fitness trainer texting another man's pregnant wife to check in on her feelings. I'm sure his motivations were purely platonic and had absolutely nothing to do with the fact that pregnant women are often feeling vulnerable and unappreciated. The late-night texting was what really got to me. I'd wake up at 2 in the morning to use the bathroom, and there would be Clara, sitting up in bed with her phone glowing in the darkness, typing away with a concentration that she usually reserved for important work emails. When she noticed I was awake, she'd quickly put the phone away and snuggle up to me like nothing had happened. Couldn't sleep? I'd ask. Just restless, she'd say. The baby's been kicking. But I knew the truth. David was keeping my wife awake at night, and she was letting him. My sister Rachel, who has the subtlety of a brick through a window and the intuition of a damn psychic, picked up on the situation immediately when I mentioned David's miraculous reappearance during one of our weekly coffee meetups. Marcus, she said, stirring her latte with the kind of aggressive intensity that meant she was about to drop. Some truth bombs. Don't let history rewrite itself in your own house. That's exactly what this asshole is trying to do. But I brushed it off, because I'm an optimist and an idiot, and because I wanted to believe that the woman I'd married, the woman who was carrying my child, wouldn't be stupid enough to jeopardize everything we'd built for some nostalgic bullshit with her high school boyfriend. Looking back, I should have trusted my gut. I should have trusted Rachel. Hell, I should have trusted the obvious red flags that were waving so hard they could have generated their own weather system. But instead, I chose to trust Clara. And that, as they say, was my first mistake. If there's one thing I can say about myself, it's that when I commit to something, I go all fucking in. And preparing for our baby? Man, I went in harder than a linebacker chasing a fumble. I'm talking about full scale, no expense spared. This kid is gonna have everything they could possibly need level of commitment. Looking back now, I realize I was probably overcompensating for the growing distance I could feel between Clara and me, but at the time, I convinced myself I was just being a good provider. A great husband. Father of the fucking year before the kid was even born. The nursery became my obsession. Not just any nursery, mind you, but the kind of baby paradise that would make Pinterest moms weep with envy. I spent weeks researching cribs, reading reviews, comparing safety ratings, and driving Clara absolutely insane with my questions about themes and color schemes. Did she want safari animals? Classic teddy bears? Something gender-neutral with yellows and greens? I was like a man possessed, armed with measuring tape and baby gear catalogs. Marcus, Clara said one evening when she found me hunched over my laptop at midnight, scrolling through baby furniture websites like I was studying for the damn bar exam. It's just a crib. Pick one. Just a crib? Just a crib? This was our child's first bed, the place where they'd sleep for the first few years of their life, where they'd dream their first dreams and hopefully not have nightmares about their father's questionable decorating choices. There was nothing just about it. I ended up going with this convertible crib that cost more than my first car, solid hardwood construction, non-toxic finishes, and the ability to transform into a toddler bed and eventually a full-size bed. It's an investment, I explained to Clara when she saw the price tag and nearly choked on her prenatal vitamins. This crib will last until they go to college. But the crib was just the beginning. Oh no, I was just getting warmed up. Next came the stroller, and let me tell you, the world of baby transportation devices is more complicated than NASA's mission planning. There are jogger strollers, travel systems, lightweight umbrella strollers, and high-end European models that cost more than some people's rent. I read every review, watched every YouTube comparison video, and probably drove the sales staff at Babies R Us to the brink of a nervous breakdown with my endless questions. I settled on this deluxe travel system that looked like it could survive a zombie apocalypse while providing maximum comfort for our precious cargo. It had all-terrain wheels, a 5-point harness system, and enough cup holders and storage compartments to make a soccer mom weep with joy. When I wheeled it out of the store, I felt like I'd just purchased a luxury SUV for someone who couldn't even hold their own head up yet. Then there was the car seat situation, which turned me into a full-blown safety inspector. I spent an entire Saturday at the fire department getting trained on proper installation techniques, because apparently, like 80% of car seats are installed incorrectly, and I'd be damned if my kid was going to be in that statistic. The firefighter who helped me, a patient guy named Steve who probably dealt with neurotic first-time dads on a regular basis, must have shown me the proper angle and tension 20 times before I was satisfied. "You're good to go, Dad," Steve said, giving the car seat one final shake to demonstrate its stability. This thing isn't going anywhere. But I wasn't done. Not even close. Clara mentioned wanting professional photos after the birth, so I researched newborn photographers like I was hiring a Supreme Court justice. I interviewed 3 different photographers, looked at thousands of sample photos, and eventually booked sessions with someone who charged more per hour than I made in a day, but promised timeless, artistic captures of your precious moments. The postpartum care was where I really went overboard. I hired a doula, one of those mystical birth goddess types who promised to help Clara through labor and provide support during those first crucial weeks. I arranged for a meal delivery service to bring us healthy, organic dinners for the first month. I even booked a night nurse for the first 2 weeks because I'd read somewhere that sleep deprivation was a major factor in postpartum depression, and I wanted Clara to have every possible advantage. My coworker Jared, who had 3 kids of his own and apparently possessed the wisdom that comes from surviving multiple rounds of fatherhood, tried to talk some sense into me during one of our lunch breaks. "Marcus, man, you're going a little overboard here," he said, unwrapping his bologna sandwich with the casual confidence of someone who'd learned to pick his battles. "Don't let her bleed you dry before the baby even gets here. Kids need love and attention more than they need expensive shit." But I just laughed him off. "Come on, Jared. This is my first kid. We want to do it right." "Doing it right doesn't mean buying out the entire baby store," he replied. "My first kid slept in a hand-me-down crib and wore his cousin's old onesies, and he turned out fine. Better than fine. Actually, he's in college now on a scholarship." I appreciated Jared's perspective, I really did, but he didn't understand what I was trying to accomplish here. This wasn't just about preparing for a baby. This was about proving something. To Clara, to myself, to the universe. I was showing everyone that I could provide, that I was ready to be a father, that our child would want for nothing. Every purchase felt like a declaration of love, a promise I was making to my unborn kid. The expensive organic cotton sheets whispered, "Daddy will make sure you're comfortable." The state-of-the-art baby monitor system said, "Daddy will always be watching over you." The top-of-the-line breast pump, because Clara wanted to try breastfeeding, announced, "Daddy supports all of Mommy's choices." Clara seemed happy enough with my preparations, though I noticed she was increasingly distracted during our shopping trips. She'd pick out items with a kind of absent-minded efficiency, nodding along with my enthusiastic explanations of various product features, but never really engaging with the process the way I thought she would. When I'd ask her opinion on something, like whether we should get the deluxe diaper-changing station or the premium model, she'd usually just say, "Whatever you think is best, Marcus." Whatever I thought was best. At the time, I interpreted this as trust, as Clara recognizing my dedication and letting me take the lead on preparing for our child. Now I realize it was probably more like indifference, like she was going through the motions while her mind was somewhere else entirely. But I didn't see it then. I was too busy being super dad, too focused on creating the perfect environment for our perfect baby to notice that my wife was already checking out of our perfect life. You know how in those cheesy romance movies, they always show the moment when everything starts falling apart in slow motion? The camera zooms in on someone's face as they realize their perfect world is crumbling, dramatic music swells, and you can practically see their heart breaking in real time? Well, real life isn't nearly that cinematic. Real life is more like death by 1,000 paper cuts. Tiny, seemingly insignificant moments that slowly bleed you dry until you wake up one day and realize you're living with a complete stranger. That's what happened with Clara and me during what should have been the most exciting months of our lives. While I was busy building cribs and researching baby gear like some kind of nesting maniac, my wife was slowly but surely disappearing right in front of my eyes. And like the oblivious jackass I apparently am, I kept making excuses for every red flag until I had more excuses than a politician caught with his pants down. It started with dinner conversations, or rather, the complete lack thereof. Clara and I used to talk about everything. Work drama, stupid shit we'd seen on social media, plans for the weekend, random thoughts that popped into our heads. We'd sit at our kitchen table for an hour sometimes, just talking and laughing like we actually enjoyed each other's company. But somewhere around month 5 of her pregnancy, those conversations dried up faster than a puddle in the desert. "How was your day?" I'd ask, settling into my chair with whatever culinary masterpiece I'd thrown together. And I was cooking a lot more by then, partly because Clara's energy levels were shot and partly because I'd read somewhere that pregnant women needed extra nutrition and I was determined to be the most supportive husband in the history of marriage. "Fine," she'd say, not even looking up from her phone. "Anything interesting happen at work?" "Not really." "How are you feeling? Baby giving you any trouble today?" "I'm okay." It was like trying to have a conversation with a particularly uninterested teenager. One-word answers, zero eye contact, and this general vibe that she'd rather be literally anywhere else on the planet than sitting at a table with her loving, devoted husband. But hey, she was pregnant, right? Hormones were probably making her moody. That's what all the books said anyway. The weekends were when things got really weird. Before David's miraculous reappearance, Clara and I used to spend our Saturdays together, sleeping in, making breakfast, maybe hitting up the farmer's market, or working on little projects around the house. Sunday mornings were for lazy coffee and reading the paper, afternoon naps, and generally acting like the disgustingly content married couple we thought we were. But suddenly, Clara had all these mysterious plans with friends. She'd be gone for hours at a time, usually returning home around dinner time with this glow about her that I hadn't seen in months. Not the pregnancy glow they talk about in magazines. This was different. This was the glow of someone who'd been somewhere better, with someone more interesting, doing something more exciting than hanging out with her boring husband. "How was your girl's day?" I'd ask when she walked through the door, because I'm apparently a masochist who enjoys asking questions I don't really want the answers to. "Really good," she'd say, and there was something about the way she said it that made my stomach drop. Like she was surprised to remember how good life could feel. We went to that new cafe downtown, did some shopping, you know. But here's the thing. I knew most of Clara's friends, and half of them were either busy with their own kids or lived in different cities. The other half weren't exactly the type to spend entire Saturdays cafe hopping and shopping. So who were these mysterious friends, and why hadn't I heard their names before? I didn't ask, though, because asking would have made me sound paranoid and controlling, and I was still desperately clinging to the delusion that I was the understanding, supportive husband who trusted his wife completely, even when that trust was starting to feel like a noose around my neck. The real kicker came when I started offering to help with basic pregnancy stuff. You know, the kind of supportive partner activities that every pregnancy book recommends. I'd suggest going to prenatal appointments together, maybe taking a birthing class, or just spending time working on the nursery as a team. Simple, wholesome, let's prepare for our baby together type activities. Want me to come with you to Dr. Martinez's office next week? I asked one evening while Clara was scrolling through her phone with the kind of intense focus usually reserved for brain surgery. Actually, David's going to drive me, she said without even looking up. His schedule is more flexible than yours. David. Of course it was David. Because apparently, my job, the job that was paying for all her medical expenses, by the way, was too inflexible to accommodate something as trivial as my wife's prenatal appointments. But Mr. Fitness Trainer could rearrange his schedule of teaching rich ladies how to do squats properly. I could take the afternoon off, I offered, trying to keep the desperation out of my voice. Don't be silly, Clara said, finally glancing up with that patronizing smile that married people use when they're trying to shut down a conversation. You work so hard already. Besides, David doesn't mind. David doesn't mind. Well, isn't that fucking fantastic? The guy who'd walked away from 2 marriages was perfectly happy to play supportive partner to my pregnant wife while I was busting my ass to provide for our family. It got worse. When I suggested we paint the nursery together, you know, one of those cute couple activities that would give us something to bond over, Clara informed me that she and David had already taken care of it. When I asked, because as far as I knew, our nursery walls were still the same boring beige they'd been since we moved in. Last weekend, she said casually, like she was discussing the weather, while you were at Leo's helping him with his deck project. So while I was being a good friend and neighbor, helping Leo rebuild his back deck, because that's what decent people do for each other, my wife was playing house with her ex-boyfriend in what was supposed to be our baby's room. They'd spent an entire afternoon together, probably laughing and reminiscing about the good old days while slapping paint on walls that I was paying for. What color did you pick? I asked, because apparently I hate myself. A nice soft yellow, she said. David thought it would be perfect for either a boy or a girl. David fucking thought. Because apparently, David's opinion on our baby's nursery was more important than mine. The guy who'd be gone the moment things got difficult had more say in our child's environment than the father who'd been planning and preparing and saving for months. But the absolute worst part, the thing that made me want to put my fist through the drywall I'd installed myself, was how happy Clara looked when she talked about these adventures with David. Her face would light up, her voice would get animated, and for just a moment, she'd look like the woman I'd fallen in love with. Except that woman was apparently only available when discussing another man. Every night, I'd lie in bed next to my wife, this stranger who looked like Clara but acted like someone I'd never met, and wonder what the hell had happened to us. Here we were, supposedly preparing for the biggest moment of our lives together, and I felt more alone than I had when I was actually single. But I kept telling myself it was temporary. Pregnancy hormones, stress, pre-baby anxiety, anything except the truth that was staring me right in the face. My wife was falling for someone else, and I was too much of a coward to do anything about it. 2 weeks before our baby was due to arrive, Clara dropped a bombshell that made Hiroshima look like a fucking firecracker. I'd been having this weird feeling all day. You know that sensation when your gut is trying to tell you something your brain doesn't want to hear? Like when you're walking down a dark alley and every instinct you have is screaming danger, but you keep telling yourself you're just being paranoid. That was me for about 72 hours straight, watching my wife move around our house like she was planning something. It was a Thursday evening, and I'd just gotten home from what had been a particularly brutal day installing crown molding for some neurotic rich lady who'd changed her mind about the design 3 times and acted like I was personally responsible for ruining her vision of domestic perfection. I was tired, my back was killing me, and all I wanted was a beer, some dinner, and maybe a quiet evening with my pregnant wife talking about baby names or nursery finishing touches. You know, normal shit that normal couples do when they're about to become parents. But Clara had other plans. She was sitting at our kitchen table, that same table I'd built with my own hands from reclaimed barnwood, because apparently I'm a glutton for punishment who likes to surround himself with reminders of better times. And she had this look on her face that made my blood run cold. Not nervous, not upset, but determined. Like she'd been rehearsing this moment in her head for weeks, and had finally worked up the courage to pull the trigger. She'd made tea, which should have been my first clue that something was seriously wrong, because Clara never made tea unless she was either sick or about to deliver bad news. The fancy stuff too, not the cheap bags we usually used, but the loose-leaf chamomile that she saved for special occasions. She was trying to create some kind of calm, civilized atmosphere for whatever nuclear bomb she was about to drop on our marriage. "Marcus," she said, and her hands were shaking as she lifted the teacup to her lips. "I need to talk to you about something important." And there it was. The moment every married man dreads, when your wife says she needs to talk about something important, and you know with absolute certainty that your life is about to get turned inside out like a sock in the washing machine. I sat down across from her, trying to keep my expression neutral while my brain started cycling through every possible disaster scenario. "Okay," I said, because what else was I supposed to say? "What's up?" She took another sip of tea, set the cup down with exaggerated care, and looked me straight in the eyes with the kind of resolve that people usually reserve for confessing to war crimes. "I've been thinking about the birth," she said, "and I've decided I don't want you in the delivery room." The words hit me like a sledgehammer to the chest. For a moment, I literally couldn't breathe. I just sat there, staring at this woman who looked like my wife, but was saying things that made absolutely no fucking sense. I'd been planning for this moment for months, reading about how to be a supportive birth partner, practicing breathing exercises, researching everything I could about labor and delivery so I could be there for Clara when she needed me most. "What do you mean?" I managed to croak out, though I was pretty sure I already knew exactly what she meant, and my brain was just desperately hoping for some kind of misunderstanding that would make this conversation less catastrophic. Clara took a deep breath, like she was about to dive into deep water, and continued with the kind of calm certainty that made me want to flip the table and scream until my lungs gave out. "I want David there instead," she said. "He should be the first to hold the baby. He's been my rock through this pregnancy, Marcus. He understands what I need in ways that, well, in ways that you don't." The room started spinning. Seriously, I felt like I was on some kind of fucked-up carnival ride where the entire world had suddenly tilted sideways and nothing made sense anymore. My wife, my pregnant wife, carrying what I thought was our child, wanted her ex-boyfriend to be the first person to hold our baby. Not me, the husband who'd been working extra hours to pay for everything. Not me, the guy who'd been reading pregnancy books and building nursery furniture and planning for this moment since the day she peed on that little plastic stick. David fucking Cross, the fitness trainer who'd waltzed back into our lives like some kind of romantic movie hero and apparently stolen my entire family while I was busy being a responsible adult. "Are you out of your goddamn mind?" I said, and I could hear my voice getting louder, but I couldn't seem to control it. "That's my baby, Clara. My child. I'm the one who's been here through everything. The morning sickness, the cravings, the late-night trips to get you ice cream. I'm the one who built the nursery, bought all the baby gear, arranged for the doula and the meal service and everything else. And you want some other guy to hold my kid before I do." But Clara just sat there with this serene expression, like she was explaining basic math to a particularly slow child. "It's not about you, Marcus," she said, which might have been the most infuriating thing anyone had ever said to me in my entire life. "This is about me and what I need to feel supported during one of the most important moments of my life. David gets me in ways that you just don't understand. David gets her. David fucking gets her." I wanted to ask what exactly David got that I didn't, besides free access to my wife and apparently my parental rights, but I was pretty sure I didn't want to hear the answer. "What does that make me then?" I asked, and I could feel something breaking inside my chest, something that had been holding our marriage together through all the late-night texts and mysterious weekend trips and increasingly obvious emotional affair. "A paycheck? Just some guy who pays the bills while you play house with your high school boyfriend." Clara's expression softened for just a moment, Like maybe she was finally realizing how completely insane this conversation was. But then her face hardened again, and she said the words that would replay in my head for months. Please don't make this about you, Marcus. This is about me and my baby. My baby. Not our baby. My baby. Like I was just some random sperm donor who'd served his biological purpose and could now be discarded in favor of the real love of her life. I stared at this woman I'd been married to for 4 years, this woman I'd built a life with, this woman who was carrying what I'd thought was our child, and realized I didn't know her at all. The Clara I'd fallen in love with, the Clara I'd married, the Clara I'd been planning to raise a family with, that person had apparently never existed. Or maybe she had existed, but David's reappearance had awakened some part of her that had been dormant during our entire relationship, some version of herself that she'd been suppressing while she settled for boring, reliable Marcus. So that's it then, I said, standing up from the table because I couldn't sit still anymore. 4 years of marriage, months of preparing for this baby, and you just decide that your ex-boyfriend gets to play daddy while I watch from the sidelines. It's just the birth, Marcus, she said, like that was supposed to make it better. After that, everything goes back to normal. Normal, right? Because there's nothing abnormal about your wife choosing another man to witness the birth of your child. Nothing weird about being replaced by your wife's first love at the most important moment of your life as a father. I looked at Clara sitting there so calmly, so certain that what she was asking was reasonable, and realized that our marriage had been over for months. I just hadn't been paying attention. You know what they say about revenge being a dish best served cold? Well, turns out I prefer mine served at room temperature with a side of financial reality and a generous helping of play stupid games, win stupid prizes. Because after Clara dropped that bombshell about wanting David to hold our baby first, something inside me just clicked. Not snapped. That would imply some kind of emotional breakdown. No, this was more like a switch being flipped, a moment of perfect clarity where I finally understood exactly what needed to happen next. I didn't scream. I didn't beg. I didn't throw myself at Clara's feet and plead with her to reconsider, which probably would have been the normal response for a guy who'd just been told his wife preferred her ex-boyfriend's presence over his own during the birth of their child. Instead, I did something that apparently surprised everyone, including myself. I went completely fucking tactical. That night, I didn't sleep. Not because I was lying awake crying or having some kind of emotional crisis, but because I was busy planning. See, here's the thing about being a carpenter. You learn to think systematically. You measure twice, cut once. You understand that every action has consequences, and if you want to build something that lasts, you need to have a solid foundation. Well, Clara and David had just demolished the foundation of my marriage, so it was time to rebuild something new. Something with clearly defined boundaries and consequences that even a fitness trainer and a delusional pregnant woman could understand. The next morning, while Clara was still sleeping off whatever hormonal cocktail had convinced her that her request was reasonable, I got up early and made myself a pot of coffee. Not the fancy stuff Clara liked, but the cheap, strong shit that actually wakes you up and helps you think clearly. Then I sat down at my laptop and got to work. First stop, the baby registry. You remember that registry, right? The one I'd spent weeks carefully curating, adding every possible item our child might need, from basic necessities to those luxury items that would make Clara's life easier during those first difficult months. The registry that represented months of research, comparison shopping, and financial planning. Well, guess what happens when Daddy isn't invited to the birth? Daddy's credit card doesn't get to play either. Click, click, click. Cancel, cancel, cancel. The deluxe crib that converted into a toddler bed? Gone. The state-of-the-art stroller system that could survive a zombie apocalypse? Refunded. The organic cotton sheets and hypoallergenic mattress? See you later. The expensive breast pump that was supposed to make nursing easier? Not my problem anymore. Every single item that I'd purchased, every contribution I'd made to our child's future comfort and safety, all of it disappeared with a few mouse clicks. But I wasn't done. Oh no, I was just getting warmed up. Because if David was going to play daddy in the delivery room, then David could damn well take on all the financial responsibilities that come with that privilege. I spent the next hour on the phone, calling every vendor, every service provider, every business that was expecting payment from Marcus Hale. Hi, this is Marcus Hale calling about account number. I'd start each conversation with the kind of professional politeness that comes from years of dealing with difficult customers. I need to make some changes to the billing information. The meal delivery service that was supposed to bring us healthy dinners for the first month after the baby arrived. Please transfer the account to David Cross. Here's his contact information. The night nurse who was going to help Clara get some sleep during those first crucial weeks. Actually, Mr. Cross will be handling the payments for that service now. The professional photographer who was going to capture those precious first moments. Change of plans. David Cross is the new point of contact. Each phone call was like a small act of justice. Every transferred bill, every canceled service, every financial responsibility that moved from my name to David's felt like I was finally standing up for myself after months of being treated like a wallet with legs. The postpartum doula was probably my favorite call. This woman, Linda something or other, had spent an hour on the phone with me weeks earlier, explaining how her services would provide invaluable support during Clara's recovery. She'd quoted me rates that made my eyes water, but I'd agreed because I wanted Clara to have every possible advantage. Mr. Hale, Linda said when I called to make the change. Are you sure about this? We had everything arranged. I'm absolutely certain, I told her. David Cross will be taking over all financial responsibilities related to the birth and postpartum period. He's very involved in this pregnancy. I could hear the confusion in her voice, but to her credit, she was professional enough not to ask questions. Well, if that's what you prefer, I'll need to speak with Mr. Cross directly to arrange payment. I'm sure he'll be thrilled to hear from you, I said, and I meant every word. The hospital bills were trickier since most of the prenatal care had already been billed to my insurance, but I called anyway and made sure that any additional charges related to labor, delivery, and postpartum care would be directed to David's attention. Let him figure out how to navigate the American healthcare system while juggling his personal training sessions. By noon, I'd systematically transferred every single financial obligation related to our baby's birth and early care to David Cross. The crib he'd helped Clara pick out? His problem now. The car seat I'd spend hours learning to install properly? Hope he's got good insurance. The organic baby food service, the diaper subscription, the lactation consultant, all of it was now David's responsibility. My sister Rachel called me around lunchtime, probably expecting to find me in the middle of some kind of emotional breakdown. Instead, she found me in my workshop, calmly sanding a piece of oak and listening to classic rock like it was just another day. "Marcus," she said, and I could hear the concern in her voice. "I heard what happened. Are you okay?" "I'm fantastic," I told her, and I actually meant it. I'm finally making some progress on that entertainment center I've been meaning to build. But Clara, the baby, what are you going to do? "Nothing," I said, running my hand along the smooth wood grain. David wanted to be the hero, so now he gets to be the hero. Heroes pay for their own adventures. There was silence on the other end of the line, and then Rachel started laughing. Not the kind of sympathetic chuckle you give someone who's clearly lost their mind, but genuine, appreciative laughter. "Holy shit, Marcus," she said. "You actually did it. You're finally making them pay for the respect they took from you." And that's exactly what I was doing. For months, I'd been treated like a supporting character in my own life, like the reliable guy who pays the bills while the real romance happens between other people. Well, if I wasn't good enough to witness the birth of my own child, then I sure as hell wasn't good enough to pay for it either. The best part? I felt completely at peace with my decision. No guilt. No second-guessing, no wondering if maybe I was being too harsh. Clara had made her choice, and now she got to live with the consequences. Sometimes the only way to teach people about respect is to show them what happens when they don't have it. The silence was fucking beautiful. For the first time in months, maybe years, I had complete and total silence. Not the uncomfortable kind of silence that happens when you're fighting with someone you love, but the peaceful, healing kind of silence that comes when you finally stop banging your head against a brick wall and realize you can just walk around it instead. I found out about the birth the way any self-respecting man finds out about major life events these days, through social media. Not a phone call from my wife, not a text message, not even a fucking carrier pigeon. Nope, I was scrolling through Facebook during my lunch break, eating a turkey sandwich in my truck and minding my own business, when boom, there it was. A photo posted by some mutual friend who apparently thought I'd want to see a picture of my wife's ex-boyfriend holding what was supposed to be my child. The photo was everything you'd expect from a carefully staged social media moment designed to make everyone believe in true love and second chances. There was David, looking like he'd just won the lottery, cradling this tiny little human with the kind of expression that said, "Look at me. I'm a natural at this dad thing." Clara was in the hospital bed behind him, looking exhausted but somehow glowing, like she'd just accomplished something amazing instead of completely destroying her marriage for a nostalgic high school romance. The caption read, "Welcome to the world, baby Emma. So grateful for David's support during this incredible journey. Hashtag blessed, hashtag new beginnings, hashtag true love. Emma." They'd named her Emma without even asking me. Not that I'd expected to be consulted, considering I'd been officially demoted from husband and father to that guy who used to pay for things in Clara's mind. But still, seeing my daughter's name for the first time on a Facebook post while eating a gas station sandwich in a Home Depot parking lot wasn't exactly how I'd imagined this moment would go. My phone started buzzing immediately. Text after text, call after call, everyone suddenly very concerned about my mental state and eager to make sure I knew what was happening. Because apparently, in the age of social media, you can't even have a private family crisis without it becoming community entertainment. "Marcus, I just saw the post. Are you okay? Dude, what the hell is going on? Call me back. I'm worried about you. Marcus, this is insane. Please tell me you're not seeing this shit." But I didn't answer any of them. I turned my phone to silent, finished my sandwich, and went back to work. Because that's what you do when your life implodes on a Tuesday afternoon. You measure twice, cut once, and keep building whatever you're building until quitting time. The days that followed were a masterclass in the power of strategic silence. Clara called constantly. Text messages came in waves, starting desperate and progressively becoming more frantic as she realized I wasn't going to respond with the dramatic emotional reaction she was probably expecting. "Marcus, please call me back. I know you're upset, but we need to talk. The baby is beautiful. She has your eyes. Please don't punish her for my mistakes. Marcus, this is ridiculous. You're being petty and childish. I'm at the hospital with our daughter, and you're nowhere to be found. What kind of father does this? What kind of father does this?" That one almost made me laugh. The kind of father who gets replaced by his wife's ex-boyfriend, apparently. The kind of father who isn't good enough to witness his own child's birth, but is somehow still expected to foot the bill for everyone else's happiness. I deleted every message without reading them fully. Each deletion felt like a small victory, a tiny act of self-preservation in a world that had suddenly decided I was the villain for refusing to bankroll my own humiliation. The calls from David were even more entertaining. This guy, who'd been screwing around with my pregnant wife for months, suddenly wanted to have man-to-man conversations about doing what's right for the baby. I let every single call go to voicemail, and eventually deleted them without listening. Whatever David Cross had to say to me, I guaranteed it wasn't worth hearing. Instead of dealing with the chaos I'd left behind, I threw myself into work with an intensity that probably worried my coworkers but kept me sane. I'd show up early, stay late, and lose myself in the kind of precise, methodical work that requires complete focus. Measuring boards, cutting joints, sanding surfaces until they were smooth as glass. There's something deeply satisfying about creating something beautiful and functional with your own hands when everything else in your life has turned to shit. My workshop became my sanctuary. I'd come home from job sites and immediately disappear into the garage, working on personal projects by the light of my workbench lamp while my phone buzzed uselessly in the house. I built a bookshelf, refinished an old dresser, and started work on a dining room table that was probably too nice for my current living situation, but gave me something to focus on besides the fact that my marriage had collapsed. Jared, my coworker who'd warned me about letting Clara bleed me dry, tried to check on me a few times during those first weeks. He'd find excuses to work near me on job sites, making casual conversation while clearly fishing for information about my mental state. "You doing okay, man?" he asked one afternoon while we were installing kitchen cabinets in some lawyer's McMansion. "Haven't seen you at lunch lately." "I'm fine," I told him, focusing on getting the measurements exactly right. "Just busy. If you need to talk." "I don't." And that was the truth. I didn't need to talk, didn't need sympathy, didn't need anyone's advice about how to handle my situation. What I needed was the silence I'd finally found, the peace that came from not participating in other people's drama. The only person whose calls I answered was Rachel, mainly because she had a key to my house and would probably show up anyway if I ignored her long enough. "How are you holding up?" she asked during one of our brief check-ins. "Better than expected," I told her, and I meant it. Turns out there's something to be said for not giving a shit about things you can't control. "Have you seen the baby?" "Nope." "Are you planning to?" "When I'm ready. On my terms." Rachel was quiet for a moment, then said, "You know, I'm proud of you. You're handling this better than most guys would." Maybe she was right. Maybe most guys would have shown up at the hospital, caused a scene, begged their wives to reconsider. Maybe most guys would have tried to fight for their marriages, their parental rights, their dignity. But I wasn't most guys. I was Marcus Hale, and I'd finally learned the value of silence. Reality, as it turns out, is a real son of a bitch. It has this nasty habit of showing up uninvited to the party, usually right when everyone's having the most fun pretending that consequences don't exist. And boy, did reality decide to crash Clara and David's little love fest with all the subtlety of a freight train hitting a smart car. It started about 2 weeks after Emma was born, right around the time when the magical newborn bubble starts to deflate and parents realize that babies are adorable little tyrants who don't give a shit about your sleep schedule, your bank account, or your romantic fantasies. That's when my phone started ringing with a different tone entirely. Gone were the angry, demanding calls where Clara acted like I was the unreasonable one for not wanting to bankroll my own humiliation. These new calls had a distinct note of panic, the kind of desperate edge that comes when someone suddenly realizes they're in way over their head. "Marcus," Clara said during one of the many voicemails I didn't bother returning, "the hospital is asking about payment for the delivery room charges. David's insurance didn't cover everything, and they're saying there's a balance of $3,000. Can you please call me back?" $3,000. For someone who made her living training rich housewives how to do yoga poses, that was probably like asking him to fund a space mission. I could practically hear David's perfectly sculpted jaw hitting the floor when he realized that playing daddy came with actual financial obligations that couldn't be solved with protein shakes and motivational speeches about finding your inner warrior. But I didn't call back. Instead, I did something that probably would have gotten me nominated for Petty Asshole of the Year if that was an actual award category. I kept working on my dining room table project. There's something deeply therapeutic about hand-sanding oak when your ex-wife is discovering that her knight in shining armor has the financial stability of a house of cards in a windstorm. The voicemails kept coming, each one a little more desperate than the last. "Marcus, please. The doula is threatening to send our account to collections if we don't pay her by Friday. David's been trying to figure out the payment, but his credit cards are maxed out from some business investment that didn't work out." Of course they were. Because guys who abandon 2 marriages and spend their lives chasing the next quick fix aren't exactly known for their long-term financial planning. Who could have seen that coming? Oh wait, literally everyone except Clara, who was apparently too busy reliving her high school glory days to notice that Prince Charming was basically a broke fitness instructor with commitment issues. The night nurse wants payment up front before she'll start working with us. David's trying to get a loan, but the bank is asking for documentation he doesn't have. A loan. David Cross, the man who was supposedly Clara's rock through her pregnancy, was trying to get a fucking payday loan to cover the expenses of being a hero. I had to admire the guy's commitment to the bit, even if his execution was more financial disaster than romantic gesture. The really entertaining calls started around week 3, when the sleep deprivation and money problems began to take their toll on Paradise. Clara's voice had taken on this frayed quality, like someone who hadn't slept more than 2 hours at a stretch and was starting to question some major life choices. "Marcus, Emma's been crying nonstop. The doctor says it's colic, but David doesn't know how to handle it. He keeps leaving when she cries too much because he says it stresses him out. I'm losing my mind here." Ah, there it was. The first crack in the fairy tale. Turns out Mr. Fitness Perfect wasn't so perfect when faced with a screaming infant at 3 in the morning. Who could have predicted that a guy who'd walked away from 2 marriages might not have the patience and commitment required for raising a child? Shocking, truly shocking. I learned most of this secondhand through my friend Jared, who had apparently become the unofficial town crier for my domestic drama. Jared's wife was friends with someone who worked at the gym where David trained clients. And information travels fast in small towns, especially when it involves someone's very public romantic meltdown. Word is that David's been calling in sick to work, Jared told me during one of our lunch breaks. Apparently, the baby's crying is affecting his sleep, and he can't function properly during training sessions. His boss isn't happy. Can't function properly. The guy who was supposedly Clara's perfect partner, the man who understood her needs better than her own husband, couldn't handle a crying baby. I'd read enough parenting books to know that colic was temporary, usually lasting a few months at most. But apparently, David's commitment to fatherhood had an expiration date that coincided with his need for 8 hours of uninterrupted beauty sleep. There's more, Jared continued, clearly enjoying his role as bearer of gossip. My wife heard that Clara's been showing up at the grocery store looking like she hasn't showered in days, buying formula and baby supplies by herself. David's nowhere to be seen. Of course he wasn't. Because playing daddy is fun when it involves holding a sleeping baby for photo ops and getting praised for being such a natural. But it's significantly less appealing when it involves 4 a.m. feedings, diaper blowouts, and the kind of exhaustion that makes you question your life choices. The most pathetic call came at the end of week 3. Clara's voice was so broken, so completely defeated, that for a split second I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. Marcus, I know I have no right to ask this, but Emma's been sick. She's had a fever for 2 days, and the pediatrician wants to run some tests. David said he needed some space to think about things. He's staying at his sister's place until the baby gets better. I'm all alone here, and I don't know what to do. Space to think. The universal man code for this relationship is way more complicated than I thought it would be, and I'm going to disappear until someone else fixes all the problems. David had signed up for the romance and excitement of stealing another man's wife, not the unglamorous reality of actually raising a child. And now that things had gotten difficult, he was doing what guys like David always do, running away. But here's the thing that probably made me a terrible person. Instead of feeling vindicated or angry, I felt something much worse. I felt nothing. Absolutely fucking nothing. Clara could have told me that David had run off to join the circus, and I would have had the same emotional response as if she'd told me about the weather. The woman who'd spent months choosing another man over me, who'd decided that her ex-boyfriend should witness the birth of our daughter, who'd systematically excluded me from every major moment of my child's early life, was now dealing with the consequences of her choices. And I was supposed to feel, what? Sympathy? Obligation? The urge to ride in like some kind of backup hero and save the day? Nope, not happening. I had exactly one response to Clara's increasingly desperate situation. The same response I'd been giving her for weeks. Complete and total silence. Because sometimes the best way to teach someone about consequences is to let them experience them fully, without interference, without rescue, without someone else swooping in to fix what they broke. Clara had made her bed. Now she got to lie in it. Alone. 3 weeks after Emma was born, Clara showed up at my workshop like a ghost from a life I used to live. I heard the car door slam outside around 6 in the evening while I was putting the finishing touches on that dining room table I'd been working on. The one that was probably too nice for my current situation, but had kept me sane through the whole shitstorm. I knew it was her before I even looked up because I recognized the sound of her old Honda's door, the way it creaked and protested like everything else in our former life together. I didn't stop working, didn't rush to open the garage door or act surprised to see her. Just kept running the sandpaper along the oak grain in long, steady strokes while she stood outside gathering whatever courage she had left. Because that's what you do when someone who destroyed your life decides they need something from you. You make them wait. You make them work for it. When Clara finally knocked, it was the tentative tap of someone who wasn't sure they had the right to disturb you. Not the confident knock of a wife coming to see her husband, but the hesitant sound of a stranger asking for help from someone they'd wronged. I let her knock 3 times before I finally hit the button to raise the garage door. Jesus Christ, she looked like hell. And I don't mean that in some petty, vindictive way where I was happy to see her suffering. I mean, she literally looked like someone who'd been through a war and lost badly. Her hair was unwashed and pulled back in a messy ponytail that had given up trying to be functional. Her clothes. A stained t-shirt and sweatpants that had probably been cleaned sometime in the distant past, hung off her like she'd lost weight she couldn't afford to lose. But it was her eyes that really got to me. Those same eyes that used to light up when she talked about David, that used to sparkle with excitement when she described their future together, now looked hollow and desperate, like someone who'd been awake for 72 hours straight and wasn't sure which way was up. In her arms was Emma, my daughter, the baby I'd been systematically excluded from meeting, the child whose birth had been treated like some kind of exclusive event that I wasn't important enough to attend. She was tiny, even smaller than I'd expected, wrapped in a pink blanket that looked expensive enough to be one of David's contributions to their perfect little family setup. "Marcus," Clara said, and her voice cracked on my name like she wasn't sure she still had the right to use it. She was shaking. Whether from exhaustion, cold, or pure nerve failure, I couldn't tell. "I know I don't deserve to be here. I know I have no right to ask you for anything." I didn't say anything, just stood there in my work clothes, covered in sawdust, holding a piece of sandpaper and waiting for her to get to the point. Because that's another thing you learn as a carpenter. Sometimes the best response to someone's dramatic speech is to let them talk themselves into a corner while you figure out exactly what they want from you. Clara shifted Emma in her arms, and I caught a glimpse of the baby's face for the first time. She did have my eyes, the bastard. Same dark brown color, same serious expression that people always said made me look like I was thinking deep thoughts when really I was just trying to remember where I'd put my keys. It was unsettling how much she looked like me, considering how hard Clara had worked to make me irrelevant to her existence. "David's gone," Clara continued, and there was something almost relieved in her voice, like she was finally admitting something she'd been trying not to think about. "He left 2 days ago, said this was all too much, that he wasn't ready for the responsibility. His exact words were, 'I signed up to be your boyfriend, not a father to someone else's kid.'" Someone else's kid. Even in his exit speech, David had managed to acknowledge what Clara had spent months pretending wasn't true, that Emma was my daughter, not his. The guy had been playing house with my wife, but when push came to shove, he couldn't handle the reality of raising another man's child. Shocking absolutely no one except Clara, apparently. She reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out an envelope that looked like it had been handled by someone with sweaty, nervous hands. The kind of envelope that contains bad news and desperation in equal measure. "The hospital bills," she said, holding it out to me like a peace offering or maybe a white flag of surrender. "The doula, the photographer, the meal service, all of it. David couldn't pay for any of it. He maxed out his credit cards trying to cover the initial expenses, and then when Emma got sick and needed those tests." She trailed off, probably realizing that explaining David's financial incompetence wasn't exactly helping her case. I took the envelope but didn't open it. Just held it while Clara continued her confession. "I was wrong, Marcus. About everything. I thought David understood me better, thought he could give me something you couldn't. But he ran the moment things got difficult. You never would have done that. You never did do that, even when I gave you every reason to." She was crying now, the kind of ugly, exhausted crying that comes from someone who's been holding it together through pure willpower and finally reached the breaking point. "I need you," she whispered. "Emma needs you. You're her father, and I was an idiot for ever thinking David could replace that. I know I destroyed everything between us, and I know you probably hate me. But please, our daughter needs her daddy." For the first time since this whole nightmare started, Clara had said something that mattered. Not, "I'm sorry for the affair," or "I made a mistake choosing David." She'd finally acknowledged that Emma was our daughter and that I was her father. It was probably 3 weeks too late and came only after her backup plan had completely collapsed, but it was something. I looked at Emma, really looked at her for the first time, and felt something shift inside my chest. Not forgiveness for Clara. That was going to take a hell of a lot more than one desperate visit to my workshop, but something else. Something that had nothing to do with David or Clara or the months of betrayal, and everything to do with this tiny person who'd never asked to be born into this mess. "You didn't have to earn this," Clara said, misinterpreting my silence for hesitation. "You always deserved it. You were always the better man, the better choice. I just couldn't see it until it was too late." But I didn't answer right away, because I knew something Clara was just beginning to understand. Something that had taken me weeks of silence and self-reflection to figure out. Love without respect is just manipulation with better marketing. And respect isn't something you can apologize your way back into. It's something you have to rebuild from the ground up, one honest action at a time. Sometimes the only way to teach the people closest to you what you're worth is to let them live with the consequences of treating you like you're worthless. Clara had learned that lesson the hard way. Now came the real question: what was I going to do with that knowledge?